Welcome to the C Analysis podcast. I'm your host, Chaz the director of C Analysis. Today, we're going to be talking about polling in the Virginia 2021 elections. And with me today, I have Sean Trende from RealClearPolitics. We're going to be going over the polls that have been conducted so far, as well as comparing to 4 years ago. Sean, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So one thing that got me to start doing raising the money for the poll that we did at C Analysis with JMC Analytics. This is a poll that came out shortly after the primary. The thing that made me do it is that there were like double digits. The amount of polls that came out 4 years ago in the 2017 cycle, it was in double digits compared to that point, 4 years ago. So now there have been 17, at this point 4 years ago in the 2017 cycle for the Virginia elections, there were 17 polls for that election out between Northam and Gillespie from 2015 through July 2017. At this point, there have only been 3 polls, and 2 of them are public. One of them is a Youngkin internal. And another one, so the 3 polls that have been conducted are WPA Intelligence, that's the Youngkin internal, JMC Analytics and Polling, that's us with JMC, and then Trafalgar. And all of them do show a close race. But I mean, it's just really interesting and also simultaneously disappointing to see how few polls there have been conducted. I mean, I'm just glad we got to do that poll right after the primary, because I would have gone ballistic if there wasn't anything out until this Trafalgar poll. But yeah, what do you make of the polls so far? There's been the Youngkin internal had McAuliffe up 2, as did the Trafalgar one, and then the one we did had McAuliffe up 4.
Yeah, I mean, the polls, such as we have them, are consistent with the close race. I'm a little skeptical. Not that it's, I think that when you have 3 polls that all show the same thing, you have to say, okay, coming from a variety of sources, you have to say, okay, like that's probably a reasonable picture of where things are. At the same time, you kind of have to view polls in the broader context of the state in which they're taken, right? In other words, I firmly believe that Youngkin won't, he'll be able to get 44% of the vote, right? Like I absolutely believe 44% of Virginians support him. The question is like, what's the makeup of those undecideds in a state like Virginia? I am going to bet that they are, 3-2 Biden approvers. And so we saw a little bit of this in the last cycle. If you look at the polls, like it was close between Gillespie and Northam over the summer. And then it broke open around Labor Day as those undecided started to make up their minds. And so I think the polls now are probably a little bit misleading on where it's going to end up. At the same time, if you're a Republican, like you'd much rather see this than see McAuliffe up 10, which is kind of what I expected given his universal name ID at this point.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. The polls from 4 years ago between June and July, polls are, again, just a snapshot in time. But the polls did show a pretty tied race for the Virginia governor over the summer, especially in the early part of the summer. But now McAuliffe has a very slight lead. Now, but here's the funny thing, a lot of people want to only look at polls from 4 years ago for some reason. I see a lot of people on Twitter will say, oh, well, the polls were off, so much for Virginia 4 years ago in the final stuff, because I think Northam outperformed the polls by, I want to say 5 or 6 points in his final result compared to what the final poll showed in the average. But that's, you don't want to do that. I mean, polls in Virginia have been pretty good. You look at just 2018, the year after that, they got Virginia Senate right on. They got Virginia presidential right on. So, for some reason, just polls weren't too bad in Virginia last year. The only exception to that would be the Senate race, where it was showing a little bit more ticket splitting for Mark Warner than what actually happened. Mark Warner only outran Biden by like 1 or 2 points, and a lot of polls showed something like 4 or 5. But yeah, I don't think McAuliffe's going to win by 10. I would be it would be going against a large precedent here in Virginia, because what happens in the gubernatorial year, which is right after the presidential, the party in power, their party's nominee, will do worse compared to how the presidential nominee did in the year prior in the gubernatorial. So Biden won by about 10 points. So I think it's unlikely McAuliffe wins by 10.
Yeah.
And I would be surprised if he even beat Northam's margin. Northam won by 9. I think this race is going to end up somewhere between something like, at the most, an 8-point, the best case scenario, right? I think it's an 8-point McAuliffe win. And with an 8-point McAuliffe win, that's awesome for Democrats. That is a very good sign for them going to the midterm. And they very likely kept the Virginia House of Delegates. I think McAuliffe's floor is something like 2. So it's kind of a big range. Obviously, have to have a big range with just how little polling we've had. But yeah, one of the things about the Youngkin campaign is, I thought he was going to shift a little bit more toward the middle. Because look, in 2017, Gillespie tried, just trying to crank up the base as much as he could, right? In part because Corey Stewart was a sore loser and didn't endorse Gillespie until August. But I'm just surprised how Youngkin's campaign hasn't shifted a little bit more to the middle. Are you worried? Do you think his campaign may be worried that they or do you think they think that they just need to turn out enough conservative voters that they don't need to really win over any moderates?
Yeah. So one quick thing on the polls, and then I'll get to the question. But what I'm surprised about, and the reason I'm surprised it wasn't double-digit polling, I agree. McAuliffe's unlikely to win by that much, and I actually think there's I don't think his floor is 2 points. I think he could lose if things go south for the Democrats. But
sure.
He has universal name recognition. He was and Youngkin's pretty unknown. So I just thought, based on name recognition alone, he'd have in the polls right now, he'd be doing much better. So it's kind of surprising me that he is, stuck at 45% with universal name ID. But it's still early. On Youngkin, in 2012, Mitt Romney had his famous Etch-a-Sketch comment that, the general election is like an Etch-a-Sketch. You just kind of shake it and you wipe away whatever went on in the primary. And I think it's actually harder for most candidates than Romney made it out to be. I think, there's just a chance that this is just who Youngkin is, and this is the campaign he wants to run, and it's hard for him to tack hard to the center. Now, at the same time, it's July, mid-July. People don't tune in, or at least people who are going to have the chance of making up their minds changing it don't really tune in until Labor Day. So I'll be interested to see what the campaign, he may still be trying to shore up his base quietly when people aren't really tuned in, and then come the fall, tune in. Now the other argument is, I guess, if you want to play devil's advocate for what he's doing, you would say, look, these are ultimately base elections, and if he's going to have a chance of winning it, he has to get very high turnout in rural Virginia. And some of these things, I think he's making a bit of a gamble, from my understanding of how the campaign is going, that something like critical race theory is going to resonate. I think it's a bit of a moral panic, but that it's going to resonate in Loudoun County public schools and some of these places where, I think Fairfax, it's safe to say, is going to be overwhelmingly Democratic no matter what. But a place like Loudoun or Prince William that wasn't overwhelmingly Democratic, Democratic until a couple elections ago, that he can use this to try to wedge these parents back. I don't know if it's a good bet, but I think there's some sense to it.
I think he's going, even if he were to win And I do want to reiterate, yeah, when I was talking about the floor, I was kind of referring to if the election were held today. I
Got
think
it.
ultimately, Youngkin does have a chance at this. I don't think it's a toss up. I think McAuliffe is a moderate favorite. But when it comes to Loudon, I think that he's still going to lose Loudon by double digits. A big thing is that there's just been so much development in Eastern Loudoun County throughout the 2010s. And these are very Democratic leaning voters. It's just not possible for a Republican to win that county anymore. It's more so to stop the bleeding. I like to refer to Fairfax County, Loudoun County, and Prince William County as the blue scissors, where you have Loudoun County and Prince William County as the blade, and then Fairfax are like the handles. And they pretty much cut into any chance a Republican has at winning in Virginia. And so for Youngkin to win, it still involves him losing Loudon even by double digits. He has to get he really has to just, like he said, get great turnout in rural Virginia. And I think one way for him to do that, I think a Trump rally in Southwest Virginia would not be too bad for the Youngkin campaign. I think if there would be like a Trump rally in like where I am, Blacksburg, though, that would really hurt the chances of Republicans flipping House of Delegates because, for Chris Hurst to win in the 12th district, it's a toss-up district that has Virginia Tech, go Hokies. He needs to have good Virginia Tech or just young voter turnout, progressive turnout. And I think having a Trump rally in the area would ultimately help Chris Hurst, but also help Glenn Youngkin. So anyway, that's one thing I think if Youngkin wants to, if he wants to try and get Trump to campaign for him, it should only be in Southwest, maybe Virginia Beach, because Trump was able to win the beach in 2016. But, he has to get the Trump margins. He has to do even a little bit better than Trump margins in rural Virginia, while also hoping that he can get somewhere. He still has to lose places like Henrico and Loudoun and Prince William by double digits, but it has to be healthy double digits. It should be 11 points, not 20 points, right? So he has to. There's a lot that has to go right for the Youngkin campaign. You have to you can't do as bad as Trump in the suburban areas, but you have to do as well as him in the rural areas. So really, he has to work more in the suburbs, and I'm not really seeing him run a campaign that's focused on winning moderate suburbanites. When it comes to the polling again, I want to shift back to the polling. You have obviously, seen how pollsters work, with, your work at your site. But do you have any idea of why there are so few polls now compared to where there were 4 years ago? Like if you were to take a shot in the dark, even?
Yeah, there's actually, it's been a long-term decline in the number of polls. If you go back and you look at the presidential election from 2008, I mean, we were just getting inundated with polls. It was hard to keep up with the number of polls we were getting, and we still get a fair number, but not like it was then. I think the first question is who's going to pay for these polls. The Great Recession really kind of socked it to media, and they did a lot of cutting. And one of the things that they cut was their poll funding. So we were already down throughout the 2010s from where we'd been in the aughts. But I think you have this kind of, okay, polls are kind of, to do a good poll is expensive. And it is, you have to find a media organization interested in it. You combine this with the reality that the polls failed in 2020 and 2016.
Right.
And so you have media organizations that are already skeptical. They're already like, do we really want to spend money on this? And you have two presidentials in a row where they kind of have mud on their face for sponsoring these polls. I mean, if you're the director of ABC News and you look at Wisconsin, where you had Biden winning by 17 points, I think it's understandable why you're like, okay, do we really want to put ourselves out there again and put our reputation on the line? So I really think it's those two things: a tightness with money over the last decade, combined with the results from the last elections.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking that of how, just because of the big misses last year, maybe, pollsters are trying to figure out how they can do their job well again, you know. Um, but here's one of the things, and I am a firm believer in David Shore's theory on a big reason why pollsters were so off last year. Or it's not even in theory, he has data to back it up. And he was on the podcast a while back. He was talking about how liberal white voters more likely to answer the phones last year because they were complying with lockdown procedures, whereas conservative voters um, were not. They were not complying and less likely to answer the phone. And that made so much sense to me. Um, but, the only way that we can have confirmation of whether that's true is how well the polls perform in, I would say, both in Virginia this year and 2022. I'm just worried that pollsters may think Virginia is not this race is not competitive for something, which I would firmly disagree with. I mean, you've already seen with the polls that we've had thus far. This is an election that is within the margin of error with the polls we've had. So that's one of the things I'm worried about. And I really do hope we get to have more polls. Hopefully they are as accurate in Virginia as they were in 2018 and 2020. And that's another thing, right? Like I said, they were good in 2018. They were good in 2020. So, I don't think that Virginia would be that much of a gamble for them if they wanted to get in the field.
Yeah, I think part of what Virginia has going against it is that you don't really have a hometown pollster, right? There's no Siena College like there is in New York, and for whatever reason, I don't think you're on Quinnipiac's list, although we can question how their polls have been the last few cycles in general.
But, Quinnipiac in 2017, they turned out to be the most accurate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did.
They were the only, because they were the only one. They were the outlier, and in this case,
they were the outlier in 2017, and I think they got Northam +9 or something. Yeah. Everybody's showing like Northam 3, Gillespie 1, and whatnot. So, maybe hopefully they get to have a poll this year. We'll see how well they do.
Hampton College used to have a poll. I don't think they've done it the last few cycles. Christopher Newport, I think, had a poll for a while.
Yeah, and Roanoke College does polls as well.
Yeah, so maybe they'll get.
I know GMU partners with Washington Post sometimes.
Yeah, so and the WAPO will get into the field almost certainly once you get into the fall. But it's hard. Like I said, if you're a program director for the local ABC affiliate and you're like, okay, do we really want to do a poll? I can see why you'd be reluctant to do it, especially when a large portion of your viewership is going to say, the polls, I don't. People were always skeptical of polls, and now there's a little bit of reason for it.
Right.
So yeah, it's tough. I will get more polls. Part of this is you and I are polling and election nerds. So we want to see it right now. If we got polls every day, we'd be in hog heaven. But most people are not. And at the end of the day, these are business decisions. And so once other people start to tune in, things should ramp up. But I would like to see some of these other races polled more frequently.
Yeah, and even just outside of Virginia, I mean, I just remember in the beginning of 2017 seeing a lot of generic ballot polls, if I recall correctly, and there's only been just a handful. You thought that with so much at stake in 2022, for, both parties, that, people be interested in seeing where things are right now. A year before most primaries wrap up. But yeah, there hasn't been a lot of those either. But yeah, I'm really hoping that we get to have some, especially in Virginia, as again, hopefully a test run. And again, I want Quinnipiac. Again, they're the ones in 2017 that got it right.
They were they were the Trafalgar.
Yeah, there you go. They're pretty much the Trafalgar of 2017. But yeah. All right, Sean Trende, thank you so much for coming on. For those of you who haven't heard of RealClearPolitics.com, I definitely recommend checking it out. They have they do poll aggregation and great reads and tons of other stuff. I've been using that since, I don't know, like 2016. So I always like checking it out and getting to look at the polls. So yeah, Sean, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.